Working on a project right now about modern women and how they change their minds and how they change their lives. And by modern, I really mean the first half of the 20th century. And I'm looking at all the changes that went on in the culture. And then I'm adding those changes to two other kinds of sources. So there's the cultural history of the time, and then added to that is the biography of the women writers, and then added to that is the stories that they tell about themselves. Because sometimes in the fiction or in the memoirs that they write, you get a deeper understanding of the rationale of how hard it was to come to make the decision. So one example is I'm working on the memoirist and pacifist Vera Brittain, who grew up as a middle-class young woman in provincial England and only ever imagined herself becoming a wife. And when she was 18, World War I began, and she decided to volunteer to be a nurse's aide and completely changed the trajectory of what she imagined for herself. So she eventually did get married and have children, but not in any kind of way that she had envisioned for herself as a kid. And how she describes that transformation and how that transformation is synced up with world history is the kind of story that I'm trying to tell right now. So this project really started with my students. When I teach modern women writers, I have been noticing how interested my students are in the lives of the women who wrote these books. So much changed for women at the beginning of the 20th century. They got the right to vote. Many women went to university whose families hadn't guessed they were going to go. Women took jobs outside the home. Women deferred marriage. They deferred becoming mothers. Some women lived lives as lesbians rather than as straight women. There were a ton of changes. And I noticed the fiction was often really great at describing the pain of coming to a choice that maybe didn't please your parents, but the lives were super brave and courageous. And in a classroom full of students who were in the middle of making all their own choices about what kind of adult life they want to lead, it's really, really fun and empowering and creative to share these many stories of the range of ways women approach their lives. I have two projects, one in the recent past and one that I'm just starting. In the recent past, I published a textual edition of Mrs. Dalloway with Cambridge University Press. And for that, I compared every version of the novel from England and the United States from 1925 until Woolf's death in 1941. So noting any changes in any commas or footnotes or capital letters or anything at all that was different between the books. I also wrote footnotes for every single proper noun in the novel. So every character's first name and last name, every street, it's a London novel, so there's a ton of street names. She takes a big, long walk, and every street, every square, every park, I gave a little bit of the history of that, and also all the literary allusions. So anything that's a reference to Keats, or Homer, or Dante, or the Bible, all of that. And then I wrote an introduction that gave the publication history of the book, and that talked about when she wrote it, what she was thinking when she wrote it, if she wrote in her diary something about what she did that day on the day that we know her to have written a certain scene, I could kind of fill in the gaps of how something going on in her life might have affected the events in the novel. So that's a project that I finished a couple years back. Right now I'm also working on a handbook to Virginia Woolf, and that will bring together chapters by about 40 scholars from around the world on a range of topics in Woolf's life and her work. So that has biographical chapters, chapters on her works, chapters on the world in which she lived, and then chapters on her ongoing influence. And I'm really excited about that because that gives me an opportunity to edit a collection of essays by scholars from all across the United States, Canada, and Europe.